Hey everybody, today we are talking about factions, and we have James with us and we have Dean, and we're playtesters, and we've been asked questions about factions, and so this is kind of like our hot take on the game after action, right? And so let's kind of get into it.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, ooh, a long question. Let's go. Factions has a heavily trimmed down rule set from Duel of Ages 2. Do you think this has caused the game to be dumbed down? Less choices, less strategy, less color.
So I kind of came into this not as experienced as these two. I've only played a few games of Duel of Ages 2. I mostly have played factions now. But just that little bit of experience I have with both, I do think that the strategy is still there. It is not really dumbed down that much. Mm-hmm. It's more streamlined in certain areas to the point that it's easier to strategize, in my opinion.
Yeah. When I approach board games, I see the relationship between how deep a game is and how complex it is as sort of like a currency purchasing system.
Okay.
For every extra bit of depth you add to the game, you do so by buying it with complexity as a currency.
Right.
So the more complexity you add, the more depth you have in the game. It's like how chess is deeper than checkers, because there's more complexity in chess. But the problem with buying depth with complexity is that complexity makes the game more unapproachable, right? So when you're approaching a game to make depth, you want to make the best value choices possible. And I think that what this iteration of the game has done is it has used this currency of complexity as effectively as possible. It's gotten the bargain deals on depth. You still have so much depth, but a lot of those extra complexities, which didn't actually add much to the depth of the game, they've been cut back. There's been savings on the complexity, whereas the depth is still totally there.
Yeah. I totally agree with you guys. I think that the rules being trimmed down has added actually a lot to the game, if that kind of makes sense. The whole idea of less is more sometimes.
Absolutely.
Because some of these rules that you'd have to keep in mind with Duel of Ages 2, we were just talking about that with, you had to be, if you're ancient, if you're an ancient character on an ancient board with an ancient weapon, you get +1, right? There's just certain rules like that, which weren't bad per se, but they're just extra things you have to keep in your mind the whole time.
That's right.
Right? And so sometimes having less things, it actually adds to the game if you don't sacrifice the strategy. Yeah, and I want to say real quick too, I think when you're picking up a new game, especially if you're not a board game enthusiast, there's this rules book shock. It's kind of like syllabus shock. Right?
Yeah.
Sometimes when you go to class and you're open up the syllabus and you're like, oh my goodness, my life is over, right? And with Duel of Ages 2, again, great game. I love Duel of Ages 2. But when you got that rule book out and you kind of flip through the pages, you're like, oh, this is going to be a while. I'm going to get a snack, This game, trimmed down a lot of the pages, the rules, to be able to...
It's on a very good trajectory, because I dare say that very few people would make the argument that Duel of Ages 1 was a better game than Duel of Ages 2. And Duel of Ages 2 already had a smaller, more concise rulebook than the first game did. Mm-hmm. And so we're continuing that trajectory clearly, because now the rulebook for factions is even smaller than that,
right,
by quite a bit. And yet there's still so much depth in the gameplay.
Yeah, it's been...
There's very few things I miss from the old games.
It's been smallerized.
Yeah, smallerized.
Which
a good word.
In the best possible way. I just got the Lord of the Rings, the Living Card game, or whatever, which is a great game, but when I took out that rulebook, I was like, okay, this is going to be a while. I watched literally 2 hours of instructional videos, and I still don't fully understand the game. It's a great game, no shade. But this is going to be a different sort of experience for... I think both the experienced player and also a new person coming in to play factions. So, it did ask though about the color, though. Is it too much color? This game?
Too much color?
Yeah, it said.
Yeah,
is it
in the sense of extra flavor?
Yeah,
right?
Less choices, less color, less strategy. So let's talk about the color real quick.
Yeah. To me, I think that in the previous game you had the ages, right? So there was like color from the separation of those 4 different ages.
Like color specific.
Ancient, colonial, modern, future, right? And those had specific categories with different terrains, different challenges, different characters. And so now you have the heroes, they're sort of bound up into this sort of collective human mythology. All of the eras, whether fiction or non-fiction, are combined together, but now the heroes are separated out into these different factions, which are essentially just heroic archetypes.
Mm-hmm.
So really, the color is there in a different way, because now it's about the people rather so much than a specific era or genre.
Yeah. It's personality types.
Yeah,
I like that.
It's very much like that.
Because you got some characters or some of these playable heroes that I just knew was like, man, I feel like this character in Duel of Ages 2 would have been, it's like, okay, maybe they were ancient, but they would have gotten along really well with someone who was modern or even futuristic or sci-fi, anything like that. And it just doesn't work out. But in this, they're the same faction.
Yeah.
Or they might even be competing factions. And it adds, I think, a little bit more of that color and that flavor to the game, because how they play is going to affect each of these faction points.
Are there some specific 100% always good strategies that reliably win you a factions game?
I definitely feel like the game has a meta, like with every match. You can't guarantee that if you set out to play the game a certain way, it's going to work, because, of course, any good plan has to encounter the enemy, right?
Yeah.
That can change things a lot. But if you take things down to a smaller level, there are obviously certain aspects of the game that you can master, which, if you perform those consistently, are usually going to be a good idea, like 100% of the time. Such as how you place your heroes in domes when they arrive on the map. If you can ever put them in a position where they're 1 turn worth of movement away from their next objective, by carefully counting out the distance, that is always a good idea. Right?
I think short answer is no. There's not
it really
100% reliable way to win the game. Again, I think it's so it's determined on the board, it's determined on your play styles, it's determined on like the characters that you receive, and so again, which adds to kind of the fun of this game is that your strategies have to change.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, I would say there are definitely like 100% bad strategies to have in the game. But in terms of like one sort of, overpowered way to win the game, like I don't think that exists.
I don't think it exists either. I think there's the main issue that I have with even the idea of like, oh, there's a 100%. There never is going to be, because you always have that human element of who you're playing against. Because they might know that strategy, and they're going to combat it. There's going to be different things, I think, even, like you were saying, based off of the maps and the placement of where your heroes are and your characters are. You might emphasize, actually doing the adventures, or doing more melee combat. Simple things like that. Lift layer. You might have to emphasize that for some characters.
Try to set up firing lines, right?
Yeah. And that could change every game.
Yeah,
I think that's one of my favorite benefits of factions, is the fact that each game is different. You're not going to have a strategy. You're going to have to play differently for each time you play the game.
Yeah.
If you were given a random team of heroes, would you feel like you had a game advantage if they were heavily combat killers or heavily adventurers?
Well, I mean, I just want them to be balanced between the two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if I have to pick,
Oh, I'm going combat.
Oh,
I know you would.
Yeah,
I
so
know
we're
that
going
you would
combat.
go
Yeah.
First off, because you don't
combat
have to
for
like worry
sure.
about all these like weird abilities and stuff that typically more adventure people have sometimes.
Yeah.
Sometimes they just want high stats and go kill
big
people
natural
with,
melee attacks.
Yeah, just go kill people with
Yeah.
natural melee or swords.
Yeah.
So because other people can't adventure if they're dead.
So,
So
Yeah.
I mean,
You need your tanks. You need your people who are out there to go fight, for everyone else.
yeah. But I mean, that's my
it's hard to
kind of
choose.
personality. So
I personally would lean a little bit more towards adventures.
Mhm.
Because melee is only going to win you a little bit. Even if you clear the board of everyone else, melee is only going to win you a little bit. But those adventures, you're going to get a lot more out of that. You could get, even the kind of the game breakers of, like the game ending tiebreakers of gold. You're not always going to get gold from killing people.
Yeah.
You're going to get it from going into these factions and doing the adventures.
but how satisfactory is that though?
We're not going to fight on that one. We
Winning?
agree.
winning feels good.
Winning always feels
Winning always
good.
feels good. I do agree on that. So
So for me, the question of do I have to have a combat heavy team or an adventure heavy team?
yeah.
I place myself somewhere in the middle, but only for one specific reason, tilts me towards combat.
Okay.
The reason
Okay.
is because for me, I love map control. I'm all about map
Oh,
control.
yes.
If you've ever played a game against me,
Yeah,
you know
yeah.
exactly what I'm talking about. I love taking a force of combat characters, concentrating that effect on one part of the board, locking it out from the enemy, making it too risky for them to send adventurers out there. And then once I've secured that map position, then I swarm the adjacent adventure sites, try to cause as much favor as possible for me. And then after I'm cleared out of that, if I can reconsolidate to control that and keep hold of it, I love doing that.
Yeah. No, map control is so important in
Yes.
this game.
If you can scare people away from an adventure site, they cannot adventure there.
Yeah, if they have to take extra movement, which extra movement always means extra turns in this game, and it's
Yes.
so important.
Yes.
If they have to do that to get around the outside of the board or just on a certain part of the board, boy, you can really cripple
Yeah.
the other team.
That's very expensive for the action economy to
Oh
have
my
to move
goodness.
multiple turns to get to where you need to go.
Yeah, and I think even then, even with having more of a combat heavy character, there are still adventures that use very easily combat centric points. Like for example, strength. You're going to be using that. Wits. You're going to be using that quite a bit for combat.
Yeah.
So those combat centric characters are still going to be useful in certain factions and in certain adventures.
Yeah.
Right. And all characters, frankly, should be doing a little bit of both.
Exactly.
If the opportunity arises.
You get the right weapon to an adventure, they can
Right.
contribute very well. You get a combat character in a position where he can adventure on a stat that he's actually
Yeah.
good at, he absolutely should do that.
Yeah, the characters are very well balanced in terms of, they're not all just combat and all just adventure. There's
Yeah.
a lot of characters that are somewhere in the middle. So
Yeah.
I say most of them,
Yeah,
frankly,
exactly.
Yeah.
are that way.
There's only a few extremes.
Totally. Would you rather teach a group to play Duel of Ages 2 or Factions? Good question.
As someone who's not as experienced as you two, I would say definitely Factions.
Yeah.
I don't even think it's a contest of which one I'd rather teach, because there's a lot of small things about Duel of Ages 2 that I had to just focus on my character, not look at anyone else's. I only had to focus on mine. Like I said, with strategy. This way, people that have never even played a game like this before are still able to look at the card and see a relation between the points, see how even the small things of how many points they have going towards a certain ability. That makes it easier for them to do that. And then even just with the character cards that you can play with, it has a lot of the rules on it already.
Yeah, exactly.
So you don't even have to
Things are
go
simpler,
to the...
and a lot of it
Yes.
shows you what you're doing along
It's
the way.
already fitting on a card. All you have to do is say, read the card. You
Yeah.
understand it. Most of the time.
Yeah.
I think even when I was first getting back into playing Factions, I just looked at the card and I was able to say, okay, I see how the rules are easily understood. Here's what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah. No, I'd say hands down, I mean, this game, Factions, is so much easier to be able to teach people, right? I mean, it's difficult to sit a whole group of new people down to a board game. Again, maybe if they're not experienced board game players at all. And you kind of get the feeling sometimes that they're overwhelmed when you bust out the rule book and you're like, okay, well, make sure everyone has a drink and a snack and let's go through this. There's going to be a test at the end, so you better pay attention, right? No, this is way more accessible, I'd say, to the general public.
Yes, it is.
And
Definitely.
I'm not nervous bringing this game out to people who, again, maybe aren't as strategic minded in the sense of board games.
Yeah.
Right. And so that part I think is awesome.
And for a very specific reason.
Younger players as well can easily.
Yeah, I agree. And for a very specific reason, which is that Duel of Ages 2 was already a pretty streamlined game.
Yeah.
Right? It actually wasn't too hard to teach. It certainly wasn't hard to figure out after you played it twice, right?
Mm-hmm.
But one of the differences with this version now is that a lot of the complexity, which we talked about, which adds depth to the game, is backloaded instead of front-loaded.
Yeah.
So when you start the game, there are way fewer things that you need to know about immediately. And that helps a lot with introducing people to the game.
Yeah. And if you're a good friend, right, you will help coach your team and help, help them along during the game, because you're right, there's just some basic foundational things you need to know about the game, your basic strategy, your basic, objectives, and then you can kind of go from there to learn sort of the more intricacies of the game. But again, you can show people that and then kind of let them learn on their own. Yeah. A lot of this is trial by fire, though, too. You'll try something, it doesn't work out.
I don't love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that
Which
experience.
is fun.
Yeah.
Especially when it's the other team that does that.
Yeah. Exactly. I think even just one of the simple things is just in the name of Duel of Ages versus Factions.
Mm-hmm.
With the fact that now you have certain characters that are part of a faction, that's a lot easier to explain than the idea of they're from a certain age and they can only use certain weapons and they won't understand certain things.
People really do gravitate towards literary archetypes easier than they do historical time periods.
Yeah, people like that. I feel like that's grown in popularity, though, too, having those archetypes. And so, again...
crossover stuff?
Yeah, it adds. It adds to, again,
absolutely,
their personality, their even personal motivations, their characters, by having these archetypes in the game. And so...
Yeah, that's a good point, man.
Yeah, that's
really, a good point.
So, anyway, easily, teaching this game to... teaching Factions to people. Last question is, in Factions, defeated heroes can be renewed into play by rescuing them from the underworld. Has this mechanic changed your strategy?
Yeah, okay, so I really like this change because in Duel of Ages 2 it was virtually impossible to actually bring back a character that had been killed.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of different cards in the game that could actually do that, so it was mostly just random chance.
Luck, really.
Massive amounts of luck. But now, in this game, you have the ability to bring back a defeated character, because when a character's defeated, they go to what's called the Underpit, and then they languish there until a ally succeeds at a certain challenge that brings them up to the pit, the upper level. And then once they're there, another ally can go and challenge to bring them out and renew them back into the game.
Right.
They come back with full health, all their starting equipment gets refreshed, they basically come back on as if they started the game over again. And there's a few things that are really great about this change. The first and best one is that if you have a favorite character in your roster and that person dies early, you can get that hero back intentionally without having to rely on pure luck. You can determine it as part of your strategy that you're going to go out and ensure that person gets lifted out of the pit as soon as you possibly can.
Yeah.
So it gives you intentionality, which adds depth to your strategy. And the other thing I like about it is that whereas in some circumstances it can be easy to get a character out of the pit if you have the right collection of characters for going there and doing that challenge, sometimes it might not necessarily be worth it compared to doing something else.
Right.
So it's not always okay, someone's down, we have to get that person out. there's real cost analysis you need to do on whether or not it's worth the extra effort, because it is extra effort.
It's almost like prisoner of war sort of stuff. You know, you almost have to like decide like what's best, like where are our efforts going to be placed? Like, is it worth it to bring out a fallen character who's in the pit, or should we like focus more on the combat still, or the adventuring stuff?
Do you need to reinforce, or do you need to just ultimately go out and win the game?
Right.
Yeah. Especially late game when it's a character just goes into the underworld, and you're saying, all right, well, it'd be nice to have him back, but we're this close to victory, we're this close to, or even this close to losing. We can't take that effort to pull them out.
Exactly.
It's gonna be better for us to just go do an adventure.
Yeah. And I would say, too, that getting people out of the underpit, the pit, is just way more accessible to do, I guess, in this game than in games past. To try to, get someone out of prison, and, they would only have like 1 health point, and so they just go right back into prison if they get hit at all. And so
that whole thing's much more streamlined than the dichotomy between killing and imprisoning characters in the previous game. No, it's true. There's 2 things that I like about the accessibility of the game in this way now. The continuity of the game, really, based on the things you just said. The first being that you can intentionally try to get characters back, which is great for starters, but also that it's actually really easy to just swap characters back and forth. You can give a hero to someone who's playing who just lost one, swap heroes around. If someone has to get up and leave, you can
someone has to leave the game, you can just swap heroes. And your team should know kind of what's going on anyway, and so it's not hard to swap heroes.
No, because it really helps contribute to the concept of having 0 minutes of non-playable time at the table.
Totally.
Whether you don't have anybody who's ever just knocked out of the game completely,
you shouldn't have
the game
that.
is over.
And again, if you have nice friends, if you have good friends, if you have a friend that has 4 characters,
they
and you
will
only have
give
1
you
character
one of the
left,
heroes they have on their roster.
And if they don't, you need different friends.
Exactly.
Just saying.
Or they need to just start grabbing your guys out of the underpit. They need to start bringing them out of the underpit.
Or that too, but then they'll say it's your own fault for being a bad player. So that also could happen. So I think overall the change is great.
It's a great change. An addition, really. Honestly, it's an addition, because you really couldn't get characters back before, not on purpose.
No,
it was extremely rare.
No, it's not measurable, frankly. To get players back in the old game, but this one, it's definitely rewarding though too to get a player back that's been defeated, especially if they go back and kill the character that like killed them. That is extra spicy.
There's no like score bonus for that, but there's a
there's like an
psychological bonus for that.
Yeah, which is really great. So. Well, cool guys. Thanks for talking about factions.
Yeah.
Hey, if you would like to like this video, that would be awesome.
And be sure to subscribe as well.
And share this video with some people so they also can get into this game.
And hit the bell notification so you get updates on new videos.
Great. Thanks for watching, and we will see you later.